said you had a strong intention to take away people's pain and suffering.
One of the earliest things, which was still continues to be very uncomfortable for me, is being able to read people's thoughts. I just know what they're thinking.
There's a famous quote by Nietzsche where he talks about God is dead and God remains dead and we have killed him. He made a statement about how people have killed God by letting go of their religious and spiritual beliefs and values. How much do you think that has contributed to the state of unhappiness and suffering that many people are in?
Religion is a very divisive concept.
Ajita, welcome.
Thank you, Mo. Lovely to be here with you today.
Good to have you. I was reviewing one of your interviews and you said you had a strong intention to take away people's pain and suffering. Where did that originate from? Was it a thing that made you feel whole and you did as a child to gain acceptance? Or was it actual your calling and you discovered that later?
Because it started so early in my life, I don't know if it could necessarily be called related to a calling. It was just, I guess, who I was. But subsequently, as I look back, in sort of my teenage years, and maybe even later, once I, became a little bit more aware of spirituality and just all of those things, and started to look at my thought process and my behavior more from the outside, I started to realize that it was more a remembering than anything else. That this was something that I brought with me, and therefore it was just sort of a very natural unfolding.
When you said that it was more of a remembering and it started unfolding, was there a specific event where you recognized that, or it was a multitudes of events that led to that?
There was actually an event. So what happened? I was doing what I was doing. I was, what also started happening was at some point in life, people started asking me a bunch of questions about life, spirituality. And for me, it was just a part of me, my life, and conversation. I didn't really think about it in any extraordinary way until one day, a whole bunch of us had gone for lunch. And from there, we went to a friend's place and we were having coffee. And it was very interesting. I was at one end of the room, everybody else was at the other end of the room. And the same spiritual and personal development kind of conversation started. And then one of my friends just looked at me and she goes, "Ajita, how come you know all this stuff?" And Mo, I really had to stop and think about the question because I had never really thought about it. It was so kind of natural for me. And I stopped to think about, why do I know all this stuff? I started so many years ago, before the internet, before information being so readily available, good and bad, of course. My father had some philosophy books and, so I'm not a reader, I never have been. So I really had to stop and think, where is this coming from? And that is when it took me a little bit of time, the realization that it is just something that is internal. It just bubbles up, I guess.
So what was it, the stuff that you knew that your friends were recognizing that you knew, but you didn't know the source of it?
One of the earliest things, which was still continues to be very uncomfortable for me, is being able to read people's thoughts. I just know what they're thinking. And there's a real disparity between how they're presenting themselves and what is their underlying thought process. And that creates a lot of discomfort for me, especially when I'm dealing with these people. So this was something that was just, a part of me, my world, in a manner of speaking, the assessment of my reality. Just about anything, if we were talking about God, if we were talking about, I have never been very ritualistic, whether on a religion end or even on a spirituality end, Mo. But outside of that, just having a sense of how the universe works, who is God? See, you're a Muslim, I'm a Hindu. we could still talk about God where I would understand it and you would understand it, beyond religion. So just things like that, reasons for personal development, how to find peace and calm in life, how to solve problems. Again, they were esoteric concepts, but real concepts all the same if one practiced them.
Do you think it was novel because it had a lot of depth to it? Because at that time, like you said, there wasn't a lot of information that people had. So therefore, when you're presenting these concepts, whether they may be intuitive or tapping into the unconscious, which we'll talk about, do you think a lot of it, because of the depth was there and people were starting to move towards wanting answers for why they were, that made it a little bit novel and more interesting, do you think?
This is a very interesting concept. So, what happens and what happened back in the day? Starting from back then, I actually kept a lot of this very hidden because, firstly, I was very young. So, why should I know this stuff? Number two, at that time, and even much more today, though it's changing, the purview of spirituality was in, sort of the part of and in the hands of monks and priests and, people who wore a certain type of clothing. They had dedicated their lives to the service of God or, given up the world in search of the truth. Whereas I was a regular girl going to school, living in society, wearing jeans, that kind of thing. So even to me, it didn't really relate from a perspective that if I was sharing with people or like I kept a lot of the things I did very hidden. If I was sending out healing to people, if I was doing my internal work to take away their suffering, it was a very quiet process and I just did it within myself and I didn't talk about it because I would be laughed at and, judged and not believed. So that was a big part of it. And so the second part of it was that even though people had these questions and they were always related to themselves, they weren't very highfalutin. They weren't really looking for those kinds of concepts. It was related to them, their problem, whatever it is that they were experiencing, and they were hoping and looking for relief. But there was a tremendous disparity because even if I was telling them something that perhaps resonated, because again, it was coming from somebody like me who wasn't a teacher, preacher, guru, and also there were simplistic concepts. And there is an instant aversion that people have to answers they're getting because I think within ourselves we have our own perspective of what that answer should look like. It has to align with my belief system. And therefore, if it is beyond that belief system or that little point of references that I have, if what is being told to me doesn't fit into that, then it can't be accurate. And people don't realize that it's those points of reference, it's those belief systems that we operate from are the ones that create our problems. And your answer cannot be from that same pool. It has to be something different. And that's been throughout even today. A lot of my time is spent, especially with my clients, to help them first unlearn what they have learned, what their belief systems are, and to show them how it doesn't really work for them before they have the capacity to take on something new and different from a belief system perspective, from a behavioral perspective, from a thought process perspective. So that's a very natural sort of resistance that a lot of people have. Religion, when I get clients that belong to a different faith, one of their big questions is, but you know, my belief system is different from the faith perspective, and I always tell them, my work is non-denominational. You can, by all means, believe in whatever God and have whatever religious beliefs you want. It doesn't interfere. But we have all of these sort of, I call it resistance to change.
Interesting. Because I have a very similar concept where going back to like the underpinning beliefs, where your actions are a reflection of your habits are a reflection of your identity is a reflection of your beliefs. But that core belief system, it's crazy because we were born, we weren't given a name, we weren't given an environment, we didn't choose our belief system, but yet we run that belief system on autopilot for the rest of our lives, which is a very scary concept that I like ponder on often. What do you think about that?
Actually, if you think about what you said, so what you're talking about it on the big universal truth perspective. But if you look at the reality of it, you were given a name, right? Your name is Muhammad, not Krishna, for a reason. You grew up in a household where teachings and beliefs have come down the generations, right? You probably hear your parents quote your grandparents. Your grandparents may be quoting, it's not only family lineage, it's a cultural alignment as well. So, you imbibe that as a child because that is a part of your environment. And then their belief systems, because you become your belief systems, because for so many years, you live in an environment with people that are very dear to you. And their belief in whatever it is they believe in is so strong that you automatically take that on and you have no reason to question it because it is coming from people who you consider wiser. They have the best intentions, they're good people, right? So we are very much a result of our environment, and through our environment, our identity is created, our belief systems are created, our thoughts are created, our actions are created, and therefore, what we create in our own lives can sort of be traced back to all the things that we just spoke about.
My question for you would be that an idea that I ponder on myself, because this is a journey that I've had to take myself, is that most people don't check the beliefs that they have. Because if I look back at the beliefs that my parent passed on to me, my grandparents passed down to me, they were immigrants. And that belief system does not carry over to where I am in the stage of my life. And so part of my personal development was to check all of the beliefs and the ones that I truly believe I didn't question. And so when I started questioning things, I started questioning everything that I was actually taught because the worldview was inherited, but it was never questioned. I have this concept like most people live the same 6 years out of high school over and over again, but it's really most people just live the same zero from age 0 to 9 over again for the rest of their life without questioning anything. Does that make sense? Like what do you think about that?
1000%. So Mo, you brought up such an important point. The first thing that happens to us when we start to, whether you call it spiritually awakening or you start working on your personal development, I believe they go hand in hand. You're interested in looking at yourself for a reason, right? And automatically you elevate. And that's an internal calling. And within that, how do we do it? We start looking at ourselves, we start looking at our family, what has been told to us. And there's no disrespect there. It is just saying, does this apply to me anymore? And you're so right. So many of us, most of us, firstly have immigrated. Some of us have come for better opportunities. Some people have escaped war. Some people have come from places where they were very disadvantaged because of the government and other things. So imagine what they had to go through. And therefore, what do they believe in? How much scarcity they have, how much fear they have around everything. And then even when they move to North America and other countries where those circumstances are different now and they don't apply, but because it has become so ingrained in them, I see this more every day with my clients. I have people who have come from Eastern European countries where, there was the government and the geopolitics was certain way. And even though they have lived in this part of the world for 30, 40 years, it is so clear that they're still living those fears. And the truth of the matter is that we have to keep looking at ourselves every day, questioning and recalibrating. because every day we experience a new reality. Every day we have an opportunity to create a new reality. Therefore, every day we are a different person, right? And so we have to sever our ties with some of the things that what our grandparents and our parents may have experienced is real, but it has to be left behind. And new thought processes and new belief systems and new sense of security has to be brought into our mind, body, and spirit for us to begin to thrive in ways that we deserve to.
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page with that. um, Going back to the idea where you were talking about with your friends and your early stories of them realizing how did Ajita actually know this? There's a there's a very like famous quote by Nietzsche where he talks about God is dead and God remains dead and we have killed him. And we are the murderers of all murderers and like we have blood on our hands. And so he made a statement about how people have killed God by letting go of their religious and spiritual beliefs and values. And we've filled them with like false ideologies or false idols, right? How much of do you think that has contributed to the state of unhappiness and suffering that many people are in?
So, 300 years ago, certain scientists came about where they started to propose this concept of only what you can prove is worth believing in. And then science became, sort of the be all and end all in terms of explanations for certain things. And we started to go down that route. And please don't get me wrong, I have great respect for science, but it doesn't address and talk about everything. It cannot. And so the concept of God, and I want to separate God from religion, right? Religion is a very divisive concept. It is meant to create the division that you are different than me, therefore I am better than you. It is an automatic a kind of a just a rabbit hole that one goes down. If you put that to put it aside and look at spirituality from a God perspective, right? In religion, each person has a God, their God is supreme. But when you look at spirituality, there is an overarching energy, frequency that we could call God. You could call it nothing. You could call it all that is. You could call it frequency, anything that you like. Now we are connected to that. We are a part of that. How do we prove it? Right? In certain religions, we believe we're here in this body. We do what we do. When we pass on, our body dies. There is no soul. End of story. That is a concept. In that, perhaps the belief of God becomes very limited because it's a small relationship. Whereas when you look at spirituality and you say there is a soul, the soul doesn't die, it keeps coming either earth or you have to then understand that there are other dimensions and there are now I'm getting into things that are very controversial to a certain segment of people. But then going back to God, even if you put all of that aside and look at God from a physics perspective, but bigger physics, in the sense that there are universal laws. Now, we all believe in, it's my favorite example because it's the easiest to sort of relate to, is gravity. We are taught very early on, or we learn very early on, that there is something that works where if I drop this pen, just leave it, it doesn't hang midair. It will fall and many things crash and break. So what do? We learn to respect whatever this is without calling it gravity and knowing the science behind it. We will set what is dear to us on a table so that it doesn't break. Now, that is a universal law, which science has taught us. We respect it. There are a multitude of laws that are not a purview of science as it taught to us. And therefore, so many of us don't know about them and we don't believe in them. And therefore, we follow different, more practical touch and feel kind of laws. And God has become a part of that. You can't see it. How do you prove it? Why do I have suffering? Why are not all my dreams not coming true? Why did my child pass away? Why did I have to have a divorce? Why am I, all of those things um, go back to God from a perspective that if there was a God, then this wouldn't happen to me. And if you start asking these questions from a perspective that you want answers to them, there are answers. But the truth of the matter is that we have severed our connection to that energy that is, I believe, the creator of the universe. And we are a part of that energy. We have that energy within us. And if we operate from a frequency perspective, respecting the laws of the universe, then we would be a much more cohesive, collective consciousness, people, because we wouldn't have so much to fight about. And forget about what anybody else thinks. If you're in alignment and living in alignment with the universal principles, and each of us did that without talking about our belief systems to anybody else, we would still be a very cohesive group because we're doing what ideally should be doing. And I, again, see this every day. When you start to follow the principles, your life begins to unfold quite beautifully, much more in alignment with what it is that you want. And, you want something different more than I want. But the answers lie within the same space.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that due to our inability to connect with the ultimate unconscious or spirituality or the laws of the universe, we have let go of some of the moral principles that we have. Because Nietzsche's whole thought process was that religion gave us a set of guidelines to be able to follow to live life by. And when you don't have that, humans have to go out and find our own moral compass and values. But our brain is not designed to create moral compass and values because it's too much work to do. And so in terms of conservation, we will then just follow who is creating those ideologies and false perspectives, right? So on that question of like respecting the laws of the universe, how does that differ from like Stoic philosophy, which is just control what it is that you can control, have detachment, versus from somebody who is really distraught from their child passing away or them having a loss, right? Where does that come into play, or the balance of detachment where you just control the things that you can control versus respecting the laws of the universe? Where does that fit in?
It depends on what this control looks like, firstly. Universal principles don't like control. So if I want to appear for a medical exam, I want to go into medicine, so what is it that I can control? How much time I spent in studying, in learning, in preparing myself, right? Which is my responsibility in every way, including spirituality, because that is what I can do. What I cannot control is whether I will pass or I will not pass, right? Now, if we come from a place of fear and I'm going to fail and I'm not prepared and there's a lot of negativity, then the chances are that that will end up happening. A certain amount of fear, worry is normal and healthy. It eggs us on, it makes us perform better, all of that. So control it depends on who's defining the control, right? So from a spiritual perspective, we always say the universe doesn't like control. Why does the universe not like control? Because there are certain possibilities for you that you might not be able to see because they are in the future. And so you might be thinking, oh, this is what I want to achieve, whereas maybe something different and better is there for you. So we can just want something loosely, work on it to the best of our ability, and leave it. And then, depending on how things unfold, we continue to walk down those paths. And it might seem what I'm saying is extremely not smart. because, like, what is that? You have to be able to know where you want to go, how you want to achieve it. In the universal sense, that doesn't work, because so many times you will see that you are trying to, I want to marry this person. And either you are in and out of similar relationships. We call that a pattern, right? That means something needs to change. Or you're holding on to one individual where you're not happy, you're not respected, but because you love them or they love you, you're holding on. Whereas maybe on an intellectual and spiritual level, maybe you should say, I'm going to give this up and let's see what happens. If it's meant to be, it will, kind of thing. So the whole control piece there are these two aspects to it. Just going back to God when you were talking about it, a lot of religion as we know it today, I think, has been distorted from the original teachings that were put out. Because when you compare a lot of religions, fundamentally, they say the same thing. And they have to, because they are all aligned with universal principles. They all talk about one God and all of those kinds of things. Subsequently, it continues to be a really good way to control the populace. And therefore, there is corruption in that message. And so many of us follow messengers, monks, gurus, teachers. I think internally, deep within, the sense of truth is really with each one of us. And if we just start following the message, not the messenger, no matter which holy book you read, the truth for you will emerge. I have absolutely no doubt. Again, I see it all the time with my clients, with myself. And that is spirituality. Spirituality is nothing but the search, your search for who you are and your connection with the divine, God, universal energy, whatever name you want to give it. It is very simple. And I love your podcast name, Simple Not Easy. And I say it all the time. Spirituality and the search for truth is very simple. Concepts are very simple. Today we have made them very complicated because we're trying to monetize spirituality for individual gain, but it is very simple, but it's not easy.
On that point of message, not messenger, from having businesses, consulting with people, being a coach, observing human nature, I've realized that a lot of people need someone or something to believe in until they can believe in themselves. And that's a
Sure.
massive gap that a lot of people have. And some people
Yes.
never get there. Now, on the point of people weaponizing spirituality, you had a statement that you said there are people who are teaching spirituality in a big way that I have some misgivings about. So what did you mean by that? Like, where do you see the gap, or are you seeing spirituality being weaponized for money?
Individuals are inherently spiritual beings. Let's start from that concept. We are divine, and the universal wisdom lies within us. Now, for various different reasons, it is blanketed, right? And for the people that are searching for something, they're doing it because within themselves there is a calling, discomfort with the status quo. And then they want to know something else. Then they start. Today, of course, we've got so much information on the internet and we start to search. And you're absolutely right. It is a great starting point. There are a lot of good teachers out there. There's a lot of good information out there. There are people who have dedicated their lives to bringing the truth to people. When we connect with those people, the process becomes easier, shorter, and you within yourself will always know, am I on the right path? And it doesn't mean a detour is a failure. It is just a part of the process. Sometimes we go 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. it is just a part of the learning and the growth. Today, because of how our earth is changing, the life cycles, there is a lot that is happening where spirituality or the need for every human being to find their spiritual self is really bubbling up, and it is becoming important. More and more people are going down that path and saying, I don't necessarily align with my religion as much, but I like the spiritual concepts and who am I and all of those bigger questions. So just because of that, there are people who see this as a money making opportunity because I could put out courses on various different things. I could have, if I'm good with the camera and YouTube or, Instagram, I could put things out there and then people will align with it. They feel good about it. But a lot of the people who are doing this really have no spiritual experience. They don't personally have spiritual growth. It is a way to make money. Now, there's also the conversation that should spiritual people make money at all? That money is an unspiritual thing. And that's actually not the case, but it depends on how you approach it. If you are selling spirituality to make money, then maybe fundamentally there's something wrong with that. But if you are in service, if you are really looking at the problems people are having and you have done your own work, you have healed, you have put in years to acquire this knowledge, to not read 3 books and done 5 courses and now you are ready to go out. And I'm sorry if it sounds really harsh, but this is not teaching painting.
Now you're an expert because you took a 5-hour course.
Exactly. Even education, if you have to teach a kindergarten student, a child, and you are 30, 40, 50 years of age, which means what you're going to teach in kindergarten, you already know ABC 1, 2, 3, CAT cat, but you will not be allowed without the certification to teach because it's much more than CAT cat. You have to do a 2-year course to be able to be allowed to teach. We don't have any of that in spirituality, right? There's no certification, and so it's not so much out of service. And then you can, when you've done enough work, you can see the cracks in their own identity and their personality. And you're like, I don't know if you're ready to give something to somebody else. Please go back, do the work, and then by all means. So, but there's nothing one can do about it because it is again a part of the evolution, and we will have both types of people there: the really great teachers, the ones that have walked through fire, and the ones that are newer at the beginning of their own process, right? And then eventually, in a decade or a little bit more, it kind of will even out. And the people who are aligning with the younger healers, healing again is a very misused term. But anyway, eventually your soul will say, okay, I got what I could, this is not working, or I need to move on. And as they say, when you are ready, the teacher will appear. And that really is a very true statement.
So the 18-year-old life coach and relationship coach has their purpose in getting maybe somebody started. Very good.
Yes,
So
yes.
inside, we were talking about universal wisdom. So you had said inside of us, we carry a lifetime of wisdom based on lives that we have lived. So some people, I think, call that past lives. Jungians would call that the unconscious, right? The universal depth or the collective unconscious of the human psyche. So I have a theory that I'm working on that through the collective unconscious is how we're connected as a human being. So we talk about how all of us are connected together, But Jung found that in the collective unconscious is where all these patterns and archetypical things keep coming about. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can people tap into that to help them be successful in their business and their life and tapping into that universal wisdom?
You could describe it the way you just did, or in my terms, I call it the soul, right? It is that space, not necessarily, I mean, we could say it's in the brain space, the subconscious, the unconscious, or you can say it's here. But it is who we are, and it is a space in which our truth, our reality sits. Now, when you are embarking on any work that you do, the fractures begin to show, and it becomes very apparent that work needs to be done, and where the work needs to be done, if you know how to look at the patterns, becomes very obvious, right? What do you need to do to succeed? You really have to peel away, first identify, and then peel away all the things that you have taken on to protect yourself, the masks you wear, the pretenses that we have. Sometimes, even very unconsciously, we do these things. But when we go into business, especially, all that doesn't serve us will bubble up. You know, we'll have tremendous fears, we'll make bad decisions, we will partner with people that might defraud us, or and when we are experiencing anything, and that's in general in life, that is not working for us, we must take 2 steps back and ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? Not externalize it and say, this person is not nice to me, or, basically externalizing the blame. Those are symptoms. We have to go inside and say, why am I always falling in love with the same person? Treats me badly. Why am I constantly opening and closing businesses that fail? Why am I getting sick so much? Why am I not getting any clarity on what I should do with my life? There are so many things. And to be successful, before we plow into another partnership, another business plan, another relationship, we must find out what it is that we're doing and why these repeated patterns are showing up. There is a reason why we repeat our patterns. Now, if you want to call it from a psychology perspective, there are ways to explain it. If you want to go past life theory, there are ways to explain it. But the truth is that this is you. You are going into the world to achieve something. And unless you are standing on a solid foundation, you are not able to build. And if you do build something, many a times it will crumble. So do the inner work.
The point that a lot of things come up, because I believe that the conduit for change has to be some sort of action that you're taking. So you have to get into business, you have to get into the relationship, you have to, as we call the hero's journey, the hero has to leave home, to leave their dwelling, to face the dragon, right? You have to face the dragon to get everything to come out from its depth. And so I definitely believe that's true for my journey, where when I started the business became the best form of personal development because everything bubbled up. And I was like, I got to deal with this stuff before I can even be able to get to where it is that I want to go. Because it pushes you into the space of the unknown. So from your journey, like, what was it that you had to work through when you started your business or got into your relationships? Because that forced you to grow at that capacity.
For me, my biggest hurdle was, and I think continues to be, is publicly owning who I am. Because I started doing this work again so long ago, it was not a thing. I couldn't talk about it, and everything is so esoteric that there was a lot of judgment and therefore embarrassment on my part, to talk about it and to own it. And I didn't do it for years. And because of that, I didn't formulate an actual quote unquote business or practice around it, because then I would have to say, I'm Ajita, this is my designation, this is the kind of work I do. And I really didn't want to. Because when I did, finally, and I have to give credit to a friend of mine who is also a healer. He wasn't a friend at the time, and he pushed me to say, "This is your purpose, and what are you doing? And you've got to do this in an organized and structured way." I lost friends. People also started to think, "Can she see through us?" And there's that fear that comes, and then they don't want to associate with you because of their own fears. And that's a big price to pay, Mo, because it really begins to get quite lonely. But anyway, I decided to own that. But even then, I was doing that in a bubble. Big part of my business is a referral business. So, people were talking about me when they came to me. They were prepared in a way to receive me for who I was, and were willing to work with me within the framework that I present. So it was fine. I had a comfort zone. As you and I have spoken now, I want to scale impact. I want more people to know about spirituality. I want more people to have that discerning factor so that they do align with more correct people than not. And so similar things are bubbling up because now, like how I'm in this conversation with you, I'm having to talk about certain things that I have never done. You know, a while ago, a couple of months ago, I was on a podcast, and because I had spoken to him about portals and some of those things, he actually asked me those questions, and I was quite uncomfortable to talk about the ability to open portals and all of those kinds of things because there are two things to this. More, firstly, there's no way to prove that I can do it, and so it becomes with a certain segment of people a difficult conversation to have, and there are of course people who understand and believe, and but I've got these kind of misgivings even within myself that, but more and more people are starting to talk about it, so I am having to expand myself and stretch myself so that I could come out and own who I really am on a larger platform. And it is not comfortable, but I'm pushing myself, and I'm doing it because my purpose and my mission is to awaken humanity to its divinity in everyday life. And this is step one.
Very good. So internally, since you're pushing the barrier and expanding, internally, what does that look like for you, that internal dialogue to overcome that and push that barrier and get out of your comfort zone to push that fear? What does that look like?
Fear of judgment, right? It starts there. So there's anxiety. There is, what should I say? How should I present myself? And it is an identity shift, even in that. That's the honest truth, that I have a certain identity. I'm peeling away certain things. So I have to, egg myself on. I have to keep my eye on the ball as to why exactly I'm doing this. I'm not trying to become an influencer. I'm not trying to become famous just so that people say, oh, this is Ajita. I truly, at the core, this is my purpose. I want people to know that there is a solution to their suffering, that they don't have to go through life, really feeling like they're alone and that there's no solution and making the same mistakes, getting the same results. There is a different and a better way to do it. So that keeps me, you know, I wake up in the morning, and I won't lie to you, I do feel scared, and I have never or very poorly, represented myself on social media because that is the way today that we communicate. But I'm calling myself out, and I'm now starting to put some material out there, and it is uncomfortable, but you really have to know why you're doing what you're doing, and you have to work through. the negativity that comes up, and it's we all have to go through the same process. It's not any different from me than it has been for you, or maybe for you. We do exactly the same thing.
So
Be
you're
positive, follow the principles of the universe. I do believe that there are higher intelligences than myself. I have relationships with them. I lean on them for guidance, for support, for love. So I do all of that.
so the
I'm not very
journey.
ritualistic, sorry, from a prayer perspective, you know, but I have my own version of prayer, my own version of speaking to the divine. I have created in my own little bubble my own very direct connection with whom I call God, and I tap into that every day.
I think that's the key where you've created a system for yourself that works for you, whatever that individually looks like. And I think people consume all this content to try to get better, but they never actually create or test or try what actually works for them. Some may be identity shifting, some may be spirituality, some may be going through relationship and working through that. So one thing that I'm seeing in a common pattern that you have said, that if you don't work on the core healing, because I really agree with that, until you work on the core, it's going to continue to follow you. So for those people that do want to heal, that want to work on the core, that are stuck in this like pattern of negativity, or they can't find their partner, or they can't start the business, or X, Y, and Z, what is that core healing that people need to do?
Before I answer this, if I may just go back to the statement you made at the beginning of this, you said that you people follow different, they're watching YouTube, and they're consuming content from different places, and they don't have a system. And this comes from 30, 40 years of doing this work. There are two aspects to us that are very distinct. We have our intellect, our intelligence. This is the information gathering tool that is tremendous at that. But the real change, the real healing, the real honestly looking at yourself really comes from this space that either you can call the subconscious or I call the soul, right? And we have to be able to drop down into that space beyond the brain, beyond the intellect. And one of the reasons why people read self-help books and consume content and do courses and still aren't able to move the needle too far along is because they've got all the concepts, but they don't know how to make those concepts their own. How am I taking this information and analyzing myself in relationship to that information? And one of the reasons why that happens, Mo, is because this is where our ego protects us, right? We don't want to look at ourselves in any negative light. We don't want to acknowledge that I had childhood trauma, or maybe, and I mean that I could explain all of that, and I want to keep it short here. And that's why we keep consuming more content, hoping that the answer will come to us. Whereas the answer will come when you take, let's say, your relationship pattern, and then analyze yourself. Am I very needy? Do I give too much? Am I choosing somebody who, necessarily treats me badly, because this reflects maybe my dad, or, my parent or something? We have to be able to really look at that. And oftentimes, like you said earlier, we can't do it ourselves because it is very painful. So that's one of the reasons, why we can't heal and move towards the change in our identity, personality, and life. So then begs the question, what does core healing look like? I will speak not as a psychologist, I will speak as a spiritual healer. The way I look at life, and I believe this is how it is, we have had multitude of lifetimes. And what are we doing by being born again? So let's look at God as a frequency, and that is at a certain level. It is superlative, and it is pure love. Now we look at ourselves as human beings, we are far from that pure love. Every time we are born, we live a life, we behave in certain ways that are selfish and beyond, not completely, in pure love, which means we have work to do to achieve that level of pure love. Now, you can call it karma, you can call it whatever you like. But our job is to look at ourselves and see where we operate out of fear. Fear then will be jealousy, fear will be fraud, all of that. And it is far from love. And healing really is about identifying where we are not in the highest vibration of love, why, and then unlearn that so that you could start operating from as much love as possible. Now, we cannot always be in full love. We're human. There is a part of the human journey, right? But that's what healing looks like. So if you go into past lives, in a past life, you may have been abandoned. You have real fear around being alone. So in this life, it can show up in so many different ways. It could show up in, I don't want a relationship because I don't want to hurt myself again. And you don't remember that past life, but it is something that you're feeling here and now. Or you may become an extremely needy person. You may become an extremely, looking for validation, and it shows in so many different ways that are unhealthy, right? So when we look at ourselves and identify, okay, I have a wound that is around abandonment, rejection, and then you work through that and you know that you are a divine being and you don't necessarily need people, and you can develop healthier relationships, and some people might decide to leave you at some point and you'll be okay with it because within yourself now you're becoming a strong person, etc. There are so many aspects of our lives where we would identify these core wounds and work through them. And that is what I call core healing. And it really goes much beyond the brain and the intellect.
I'm doing a massive deep dive into Jung's work because that was the work that I had to do my core healing, as you identified, so the
Sure.
individuation process. And so what you're talking about is just going into like the shadow, all the things that you've put away, facing them, that fear, the anger, the resentment, the hurt, and coming out of the other side and processing what needs to get processed, or integrating, as Jung would say, into who it is that you actually are. And that is one of the scariest things that you could do as a human being continuously, because new things come up as you get into different facets of life. So that brings my question to, Jung had this concept of some suffering like wasn't meant to be resolved, it was just meant to be integrated. So have you ever sat with someone who's trying to just fix, 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 and what they actually needed wasn't just like fixing, it was just integrating and then just being aware and recognizing that it is there and there's nothing they could do about that. So what did that look like?
Jung's verbiage and my spiritual verbiage may be different, but the concepts are the same, right? You can call it shadow work. I can call it core deep healing, soul healing. He calls it subconscious. It literally is the same work, 100%. Now, it's a fact that every single thing cannot and is not meant to be changed and healed. And where does that come from? So let's say somebody is born with a handicap. They chose to come into this world with that impediment, if I may, because it creates difficulties within the way society is set up. But they brought this into this world because they don't have this before they're born. This is a human affliction. So that whatever they experience that is around that situation is what they need to quote unquote learn. They'll have to be more resilient. They'll have to be more accepting of the world and themselves. All of those kinds of things. Those are the lessons that the soul decided that they're going to go through and learn in this lifetime. So when we say in spirituality that the soul has infinite capabilities, is made in the likeness of God, and that anything and everything is possible, fundamentally that is true, but it may not be true in this particular lifetime in the game that you're going to play in this world, right? So what happens, if I may share, this is beautifully illustrated in, I think they've created a new series on Christ. It's called The Chosen. And I was watching it, and I, please paraphrase, so please excuse me, but one of his apostles, I think he's Simon, has a difficulty with his leg, and he walks with a stick, and he's in constant pain. Now, The Chosen is about Christ and coming into, people finding him for the great soul that he is and all the miracles, and so it's really worth watching. So what happens now? He's performing these miracles left, right, and center. In fact, there's a lady who's had some medical issue for 12 years and just touches his robe and is cured. So Simon one day loves Christ to bits, doesn't say anything. But there's a scene where it's Simon and Christ, and of course Christ knows what he's thinking. So he says to Simon, "Do you have something to say to me?" So then Simon very politely says, basically saying that you're healing everybody. I am your person. I love you more than any of these people do. And I'm suffering. Why are you not taking care of me when it is well within your capacity to do so? And Christ says to him, because in this lifetime it was not meant to be. That was literally, it was so powerful for me as a healer, because when somebody comes to me as a client, one of the things that I tell them is that I am not making you any promises because I don't know who you are, right? And what is your journey? I promise that I will do the best I can, give you all of me. That is all I can do. I do not promise that your life is going to completely change and that, whatever it is that you want to achieve, you can. And oftentimes, great things do happen. But I think as a healer, it is unfair to say, because you don't know the soul's contract with itself.
That was powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna have to check that out. One question that I wanted to ask you was, what's one question about human suffering or healing or the pain that people are in that you're sitting with the longest? It's something that you've pondered about and you still haven't been able to resolve or find some sort of angle on.
Very simple. Why are we so mean to each other? You take any human being, fundamentally, we're the same. We want the same things, exactly the same things. You might want to do business and I might want to, be a homemaker. But at the end of the day, our desires for ourselves, our family, is exactly the same. Then why am I not able to appreciate you for wanting to achieve what you want and being able to step up and say, Mo, this is what I can give you, and vice versa, instead of us having all of these divisions, jealousy, and trying to bring people down, and all the horrible things that we do to each other. Why do we do it? I mean, Again, fundamentally, if I look at it from a karma perspective, I understand and I can explain it. But in my humanness, it boggles my mind. We're okay to kill each other. We're just not good people.
That's awesome.
Sorry, what did you say
Oh, I said that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. How do you feel?
about that?
Yeah. Or just in general. I think we can wrap up here.
This statement actually brings up a lot of real emotions inside of me. It
Yeah.
really, um, I can get very angry. I can get very sad. I can feel extremely helpless. But beyond that, I feel fantastic. I'm very happy to be here having this conversation with you in life in general. I'm just in a good place. I'm thrilled every day that I wake up.
On that topic, there's a book called The Rational Optimist. And the whole concept is that we're in a better position now as humanity than we've ever been, right? Less people are dying on the concept of being mean and war and poverty and things of that sort. The whole concept in that book is that it's just come to light now because of media and everything being in the forefront of the mind. But there's tons of people who died in the plague. There was wars back then. People pillaged villages and things of that sort. And just because it's coming to the forefront, it's on the news and it's everywhere. It seems more common, but it is less than it actually was hundreds of years ago. So what are your thoughts on that?
True, I agree. But the way I look at it is back then, from an education perspective, from a development, so humanity development perspective, people were in survival mode. And, today when we look at ourselves, the advancement in science and technology, and we're having this conversation because we're interested in personal development and, seeking spirituality. We have no reason to do what was done back then and more. We have every reason to be better. And I truly believe this, Mo, that when one person heals, the world begins to heal. Because as that one individual, you vibrate at a higher frequency. You want better for yourself. You want better for your fellow man and humanity at large. And then it's a ripple effect. So it behooves each one of us to work on ourselves so that collectively we can be better. We deserve it. We have the capacity. Let's get on with it.
That's awesome. Jita, appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure entirely, Mo. Thank you so much.